7 days before Gavin made his leap, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commander of Britain's 21st Army Group, stood on the tarmac at Mellsbrook Airfield and peered into the distance, watching the Supreme Commander's C-47 prepare to land at this airfield just outside of Brussels. Montgomery had not seen Eisenhower in over 2 weeks, and, to Montgomery's way of thinking, this lack of personal contact spoke volumes about how out of touch Eisenhower was with the battles raging many miles over the eastern horizon, all along the frontiers of Germany. Montgomery liked Eisenhower as a man, but he thought him ill-suited for direct command of armies in the field. Ike, as nearly everyone called the commander of Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Forces, SHAEF, or SHAEF, was a diplomat, an organizer, a big strategic thinker who excelled at managing people. He was not, in the Field Marshal's opinion, a combat commander. Ike, throughout his long Army career, had spent most of his time as a staff officer, and he had logged little combat time. By contrast, Monty, as most called the Field Marshal, had spent plenty of time in battle, commanding soldiers, from his days as a small unit leader in World War I, when he was badly wounded, to this war, when, in 4 years, he had risen from division to Army Group command, mainly by winning battles. Revered by the British public, he was the country's most famous general, and, it is fair to say, he reveled in the reputation he had built. Egotistical, vain, and abrasive, the diminutive Briton believed wholeheartedly in his own greatness. Yet he was perceptive enough to understand that his country was now the junior partner to the United States in the Western Allied coalition, and that this necessitated serving under an American Supreme Commander. Monty supposed that this was inevitable, so he had long since reconciled himself to it. The problem, as Montgomery saw it, was Eisenhower's attempt to control the armies as land force commander, but from a remote distance. Even now, on September 10th, Ike's headquarters was located 400 miles to the west in the Norman town of Granville, on the western side of the Cotentin Peninsula. This was possibly a suitable place for a supreme commander, Monty later wrote, but it was useless for a land force commander who had to keep his finger on the pulse of his armies and give quick decisions in rapidly changing situations. In fact, since the latter part of August, communications between Eisenhower and his subordinates had been sketchy at best. There were no telephone links from Granville to the Army Group commanders, Montgomery, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley of 12th Army Group, and Lieutenant General Jacob Devers of the 6th Army Group. Radio contact between Ike and these men was almost non-existent. To communicate with his commanders, Ike was almost totally dependent on cables, and even that medium was sometimes unreliable. For instance, Monty had sent a message to Ike nearly a week earlier, on September 4th, outlining his proposal for a powerful and full-blooded thrust toward Berlin. Eisenhower did not receive the message until the next day, when he quickly cabled a response. For some reason, this reply was fragmented into 2 parts, one of which reached Montgomery on September 7th and the other on September 9th. To make matters worse, the ending paragraphs were the first to arrive. The introductory material came only later. Obviously, this was a ridiculous and unacceptable situation under any circumstances, but especially now, when vital decisions needed to be made. Monty intended to tell Ike, in no uncertain terms, that communications must be improved, and that he must agree to unleash 21st Army Group's push for the enemy capital. The Germans were reeling. The Allies had decimated their armies in Normandy and had followed up that victory with a powerful invasion of South France. Rather than lose whatever remained of their armies in France, the Germans began a headlong retreat to the east. Allied soldiers had liberated Paris on August 25th. Now, more than 2 weeks later, the remnants of German units were still fleeing to the borders of their fatherland. Montgomery had come to believe that the German army was on the verge of total defeat. He knew as well as anyone that the Allied logistical situation was grave, but in spite of the supply problems, he believed the time was right for a major thrust into northern Germany, all the way to Berlin, to end the war in 1944. Only the 21st Army Group was in a position to make such a thrust. To do it, Monty believed that he needed absolute priority of supply at the expense of all the other Allied armies, which, of course, were primarily American. Eisenhower apparently did not agree. He was reluctant to halt all of his armies so as to assign logistical priority to Monty for a Berlin move. No reallocation of our present resources would be adequate to sustain a thrust to Berlin.